Hey.
Hey.
So, Cole and I have just been like really exhausted. Both our jobs are in pretty much full swing right now. And so we've just been like physically exhausted, just mentally exhausted. And we are now like, would you call it spiritual exhaustion? Oh my God. What are you laughing at?
Yeah.
So it's not like we're like, oh, I don't want to be a Christian no more. Oh, I don't want to serve no more. Oh, I don't want to read my Bible no more. We're just like tired. And I've talked to several Christians. They're like, I get exhausted. I get spiritually exhausted. I get mentally exhausted. And we just get tired because it's not a sprint. You know, you've heard that saying, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's a really long marathon. And it's a really exhausting marathon sometimes. And you know, we press into Jesus and we're like, you know, give us strength to get through the battles, and he does. But also, what?
I'm just listening to him eat.
It is like, I don't feel ashamed that I don't feel shame that I can say I'm spiritually exhausted. Like, I'm just tired. Like, my spirit man is tired. It's not that he's not hungry. It's not that he's not on fire. He's just tired. And today, this morning, you know, we're going to church and we have it playing over the speakers, our Bible, that is. And it's our Sunday routine because we are like in such a time crunch to get somewhere. And 2 Kings 21, 22, and 23 start playing. And we're reading it. And if you don't know what that is about, it's about King Josiah. So his grandfather
Manasseh
and his dad
Amen.
were pretty wicked people. And then Josiah stepped in and became king at 8. And you're like, how did an 8-year-old become king? Because, woo, I can never imagine. And it's because his dad was assassinated. And, I mean, if you read about Judah, they just walk around this, like, not like Moses for 40 years in the wilderness, but just kind of just, like, walking around. And they were, like...
They weren't following God.
Yeah, like, they were just, like, kind of just wandering people. And they were worshiping, like, pagan gods, like the god of fertility, you know, yeah. Ostrom poles? Astrum poles. They had those up in the temples. They just had all this, like, worldly things that were never going to get them where they wanted to go. They had said, okay, God, like, you're on this shelf. We'll call you when you need you. And they thought they never needed him again. And they just filled his temple with just garbage. And so Josiah steps in at 8, and he's obviously like, okay, something has to change. Like, something somewhere has to give. And he's like, okay, let's start cleaning up the temple. Like, let's start getting all that out, burn it, get rid of it. And we had seen this before of them being like, oh, let's get rid of this one thing, and that'll purify the temple enough. And Josiah was like, no, get rid of all of it. And this high priest came along, and he was like, oh, look what I found. I'm not going to tell you what he found because I want you to read it. And then they went to work, and Josiah was like, nope, we're changing it all. Like, bam. And this is how, and we're not going to tell you how it changed. Like, figure out what the priest found, figure out how it changed, because it's an amazing story, because he was 8 when he took reign, and 18 years later this happened. So he was 26 when we did the math?
Mid-20s, yeah.
And just see what a 26-year-old did. And so we get to church to sit down for service, and we're both kind of like, we're tired. And I look at Cole, and I'm just kind of like, where's the breaking point? Like, what has to give for us to change? Like, you know, when do we call it, like, when do we say, okay, we can't take it anymore? Like, when's that breaking point? And we just kind of we go into worship, like, music starts playing, and we're kind of like, okay, God, you know, kind of just praying out about the same thing, earnestly seeking God and, like, his direction, his wisdom, like, God, where do you want us? Kind of, because as Christians, we are supposed to examine ourselves daily, because we were made in the body, the image of Christ, but we're human. We made it ugly, we made it tacky, we made it dirty, because we're not perfect. And so, like King David says, you know, Lord, examine my heart. Anything that's not like you, get rid of it. Like, help me. And so we're praying, we're going after God, you know, trying to, you know, because we should be trying to become more like Jesus every day. And service starts, the pastors start preaching, and they're like, okay, today we're going to talk about living on fire for God. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I love this message already. I like the title. And they're like, we're in 2 Kings 21, 22, and 23. And I look at Cole, and I'm like, get out my Post-it note, and I'm like, writing it. I'm like, is this a sign from God or not? You know?
They did 22 and then gave the backstory for us.
Oh, okay, they did 22.
Yeah.
And then I handed the Post-it note to Cole. And I'm just like, okay. And I was like, this has to be a sign from God. Like, we asked, and he's like, watch. And so before in nursery, we served nursery, and we were talking about Abraham and how God told Abraham, like, you're going to have a son. By the time I return this time next year on this given date, you're going to have a son. And Sarah was all 99 years old at this point, and they've been trying forever to have a child. And Sarah, like, snickers, and she's like, child? Yeah, right. And God's like, Sarah, why'd you laugh? And then Sarah's all like, I didn't laugh. And then he's like, oh, yes, you did, little girl.
I turned that off.
He didn't say those exact words, but sorry, Chuck's protecting the house from
The chickens.
probably a tree, let's be honest. But anyways, he starts, and so they end up having a son, and then, you know, figure out what God tells them to do with Isaac. Because they get Isaac. Abraham's like, I got all these plans for Isaac, and God's like, I got different plans, Abraham. So read that story, figure out what he does, because we know, now the 2-year-olds know. And they were like, oh my God. They were like, not really understand the concept, but they were like, oh my gosh, that's fire. Fire's bad. And I was like,
Yes. Good job.
got it. They're learning though. So I was like, proud of y'all. And then our pastor is like making a reference from Abraham.
He was saying that you can't make excuses for God not to use you. Like, oh, I'm imperfect. Yeah, well, I'm perfect. Oh, I'm too young. And then that's when Pastor Brad was like, King Josiah was literally 8 years old.
When he took rain.
And so that's like, you know, you can't say you're too young and you can't say you're too old, because when Abraham got Isaac, he was well over 100 years old.
Yeah. And so I was just like, wow, what we read in the morning in this Bible, and then like what we talked about in nursery with the 2-year-olds, like, that's insane, God. Like, we asked, and you sent like an answer. And it just reminded me, like, we are faithful to God. Like, we are supposed to be faithful to God. We're supposed to be good, faithful Christians, because when we get to heaven, he's going to say, good job, well done, my good and faithful servant. And I was just like, no matter how faithful we are to God's like so much more faithful to us. And like, if you ask, he's going to answer. And you got to be ready for, like, it might not be your answer of like what you were expecting. And sometimes, as Cole says, my word, you have to get some spiritual spankings.
Yep.
Because we're stubborn, if you're like me, from the South. And I was like, God, I wasn't like, God, you know, give me $1 million. Or God, take this burden. I was just like, God, I need a sign. I need like a, you got this, like, not Jumbotron sign, God. I just need like a sign. Like, sign the size of a mustard seed if you must. And he, like, as soon as we got done praying that prayer, he was like, bam, right in your face. And I was like,
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, God. And it was just so refreshing just to know that, like, no matter what, God cares enough. Like, when we ask, he's going to say, like, here's your sign, here's this. He wants you to ask.
No matter how tired you are, you got to keep that faith, because God's going to remain faithful in you.
Yeah.
And he knows what we're capable of before we even have the idea.
Yeah. He's like, I made you. And we just have to say, like, it's just so amazing and awing that, like, no matter what, God remains so faithful to us. And he cares about the small things. He cares about the numbers of hairs on your head. He collects every tear that you cry. He cares about all the little things. And that's just so amazing to me. Like, ask and you will get an answer. Be prepared to get an answer you might not like. But yeah.
Yep.
Do you have anything?